Welcome back to Kickback with Courtney. I'm your host, Courtney, and we are here with Mark Walsh, who is a professor of English at the Massasoit Community College, a poet, and a judge for the next Brockton Poet Laureate selection process. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So I kind of want to get to know you because you are the judge, well,
Sure.
one of the judges.
Yes, one of the judges, right.
So for those who are listening and they're interested, it would be great to get to dig deeper and
Sure.
get to know you. So when did you start writing?
I started writing when I was 14 years old.
Oh, wow.
And, I probably started writing poetry back then, but, I didn't call it poetry. I called it song lyrics because I was just trying to emulate a lot of my favorite rock singers. And so that's how I started with lyrics. I wrote lyrics for bands, but this is something that I have done consistently since I've been 14.
Oh, wow. That's an early age. I don't think I started writing at that age.
Yeah, you might have if you think about it.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I thought a little deeper on
Right.
it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So do you find writing to be easy?
Oh, I think there's some writing I find to be pleasurable, and I think poetry for me is just a pleasure all the way through. And even when it's getting tough, it's still pleasurable in the revising and in finding that right word for the right line. Other types of writing, I also write book reviews. And that I can find the most challenging because I want to get it right, and I also want to, share my enthusiasm for the book in a way that kind of celebrates the author, and so I've got that on my mind as well. So that I find a little bit difficult.
Do you ever experience writer's block?
Yeah, and I think the funny thing about writer's block is that's probably when you're doing most of the writing. You're just writing and writing, but you're like, this doesn't really sound interesting or good. But yeah, I think that happens a lot. But you just keep writing your way through it until you find that thing that really inspires you.
Absolutely. I agree with that one. So, because I experience writer's block all the time, and I'm sure a lot of other people do. What is your creative process when you are writing your pieces? So maybe that could help those who may experience writer's block or may not know where to begin.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think lots of times what I do, and you can go to different sources or you can read different books. If we're talking about poetry here, then you can go to poets and writers. Or you can, find a book about the art of poetry written by a poet. And invariably, you're going to find all of these prompts in there that is going to say, write a free write about, what you remember of your favorite childhood birthday. And then just, write a free line poem about that. Or write a poem using these 5 words, and or write a poem. Here is a line from, Gwendolyn Brooks. Write the next 4 lines of a stanza or something like that. So I think a lot of times prompts that you are not normally accustomed to can help you kind of mix things up a little bit and push you in a different direction.
So you mentioned Gwendolyn Brooks. She's one of my favorites. Who are some of your favorites?
Oh boy. Well, I just finished reading one of her, the collected Gwendolyn Brooks, and there was a lot of poems that she was writing at the outset of World War II that were just beautiful and fascinating. So I would say big national poets. I would say I love Seamus Heaney, Gary Snyder, There was a Russian emigre who died a few years back named Joseph Brodsky, whose poems I really, really love. Pablo Neruda. And then locally, I'm very, very fortunate to have a couple of friends whose poetry I just adore. Barbara Siegel Carlson out of Carver, Massachusetts, and then Zvinya Orlowski on the South Shore, who just contributed to this. She's a brilliant poet, but she just contributed to this amazing collection of translated poems from a Ukrainian poet that is just stellar. Awesome. And I can go on and on and on. I mean, I'll email you later today and say, "Oh, Courtney, I forgot to mention."
I have quite a few myself. I really like Maya Angelou. I think she's one of my favorites. Yeah, and though she's not a poet, I really like Zora Neale Hurston's work.
Oh yes.
Yeah. I mean, I can go on too.
Yes.
I might email you things.
There was a beautiful documentary on Zora Neale Hurston
Yes.
on PBS a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
I did see it. Well, before we jump into the Poet Laureate specifics, what advice would you give those who aspire to write?
Can I use this as an introduction to the next episode we're going to do?
Oh,
so I
absolutely.
can give you a full answer.
Please do.
So I would say the first thing is, I mean, it's always important, and I think this is good advice. Read everything that you can get your hands on, and then try to write every day, whether it's you're working on a poem or if it's a journal entry, or just have that familiarity with the language and just the practice of writing every day. But then the other thing I would tell someone who was, looking at this and looking at it seriously, I would tell them, think about like a 3-year plan or a 4-year plan. They're like, okay, I'm going to be woodshedding here over this year, and then I want to share my work. So where do I start to do that? So you start to look for open mics and other venues that you can get up and read your poetry, and then think about, okay, where am I going to send my poetry to? Am I going to try to submit to some magazines, submit to some contests and things like that, and then is there a poetry workshop that I could participate in to learn a little bit more? It's, poetry is a craft, and it's important to keep working on that craft. But I also think, it's important to have that plan in mind that's going to keep moving you forward. Incrementally, small steps, small moves, but just keep moving yourself forward. And I think that those things, that's what I would tell an aspiring writer.
You mentioned open mics. Are there any open mics around this area?
Why, yes, they are, Courtney. In fact, there's one taking place today as we're taping this. So Philippa Soros, the Poet Laureate of Brockton, has a open mic at the library in Brockton here. This is called Everyone Has a Voice. It's a wonderful series. It takes place the third Saturday of the month, 2 p.m. There is a great poetry series that I'm very happy to say is gaining momentum down at Plymouth, called Poetry, the Art of Words, and that took place last Sunday, 2 p.m. at a bookstore called Books and Sundry, right at downtown Plymouth, right off the Rotary by the water. I just learned that I have to go check out. There's a new open mic out in Webster, Massachusetts. There's up on the North Shore. There's one in Essex. There's a really nice little that I just discovered, a little poetry group in Mansfield, and their reading series is called Pour Me a Poem. And usually all of these are, you have a featured poet, and then there's an open mic. So, and lots of times the featured poet, has 1 or 2 books published, and has been writing poetry for quite some time. So it's a great opportunity to actually, again, network, interact, and I find the poetry community immensely warm and
Absolutely.
inviting and encouraging. It really is. a wonderful thing about poets, that they really help each other out. So those are just a couple that I can mention. Oh, I think there's one in Weymouth too, Weymouth, Mass. I haven't been to this one yet, although I've heard about it, and I'm blanking on the name. I believe it comes out of a yoga studio in Weymouth. So they're around. You can find them, and I think the more you go to an open mic, you hear people talk, or people will tell you, "Oh, you should go read down in Plymouth, or you should go out to Worcester and try that one." You know, and so they're really kind of again, inviting you in, saying you are part of our group now. Here's where else you can read your poetry.
I do find the poetry circle to be very warm as well.
Oh my goodness!
I don't think I've ever had a bad experience.
Never.
At all.
Never. Yeah. There is. Well, I love. There's a line from Seamus Heaney that it was in an interview. I think I read or heard him say once that he worked for his living. He taught. He did journalism and television and things like. He was a presenter. He said, so you work for your living, but poetry is a grace. And I think because of that is kind of freeing, that everyone is making their living in another way. They're not making their living through writing. And I think oftentimes when you do that, it gets to be a little bit more competitive, a little bit more edgy. So there is just that I think is something else that contributes to the warmth of poets in the community.
Absolutely. So let's dig into, I think, what
Sure.
most people are really interested
Yes.
in, and that Brockton is ready to select its next poet laureate.
Right.
So that's exciting.
It is.
I know, unfortunately, Phil was not able to join us today.
Right.
But do you have any insight on the process that took place by bringing it to Brockton?
Sure, I can tell you a little bit about it. I think that this was something that Philip envisioned happening, and one of the things I think that's been happening right across the country in recent years is that there have been the creation of town poet laureates. I mean, we have our national poet laureate, who's right now it's Ada Limon, and then you have state poet laureates. But there has been this kind of wonderful opening up in towns and communities where you have the poet laureate of the city. And I think that's something that that had been happening. I thought Philip thought that was a great idea. And so he worked with the Brockton City Council and really sort of got that underway. And, he became the first poet laureate. He did this for 2 years. And it's a real, it's a public-facing position. And, it's one that encourages poetry. You are writing poems for, official city occasions, civic occasions, but then you're also doing a lot of work in promoting poetry and the arts in the city. So I think that's and I think that's always been the major thrust of the poet laureate going back. I mean, way back in time. I mean, the poet is even in the ancient days of the Welsh and the Anglo-Saxons. I mean, they always had that bard or that shop who would be. And now we commemorate the great warriors or whoever they are, and it's the poet laureate is still commemorating the great important people and the important things that happen in a community.
I know you're not a historian, but but you may know this answer.
Okay.
What was the history of creating the National Poet Laureate?
So I do know a little bit about this. So the National Poet Laureate in the United States. It has always come out of the Library of Congress. And that's where you find lots of times that the poet laureate is something that comes out of the library, the town library, the city library. But it came out of the Library of Congress, and it was originally, the position was a consultant of poetry. So, and this is, I believe this originally goes back to the 1930s and came all the way up as a consultant of poetry through the 80s, and people like Gwendolyn Brooks, people like Robert Frost were the consultants of poetry. And then in the 80s, the Library of Congress designated it as the poet laureate of the United States, and I believe the full title is poet laureate in consultation or something like. I think consultation is still kind of in that title or in the function. And then that started in the mid-'80s with Robert Penn Warren, and it's been a position that a poet can elect to do for a year, or they can re-up for, I think, 1 or 2 additional years. I think it's 2 additional years because Robert Pinsky, back in the late 90s, I think he did it for 3 years. And I think Joy Harju, she might have done it for 3 years as well, 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, just to give it some context for in when we bring in it local.
Right.
So what are the criteria and requirements for becoming the Brockton's next poet laureate?
So the next poet laureate, the criteria, so as you know, we have the 2 positions here. We have the poet laureate and then we have the youth poet laureate, but the criteria are very similar. So it has to be a Brockton resident. Poet laureate has to be a minimum age of 21 or older. For the youth poet laureate, the age range is 15 to 20 years old. Okay. And so that would be the criteria there. And then there are the duties that's involved, very similar to what I was saying, that you provide poetry readings. You're going to be writing poems for celebratory memorial occasions and things like that. You're going to be involved in creating programs that raise awareness of poetry, of art, and the diversity here in Brockton. So I mean that's the sort of general kind of criterion function there. And
it kind of touches based on the duties and responsibilities as well, what they would be doing.
Right, exactly.
Outside of that, are there any other responsibilities for them?
I think one of the things that's really nice about this position is that there is a bit of room for the poet laureate to, think about, okay, for example, if you're talking about creating programs that raise awareness, well, what does that mean? And I think they have a little bit of leeway or freedom there in what they decide to come up with. I mean, one of the things that Philip did, so he did a great reading. He's established this with veterans, on Veterans Day, where we're reading the poetry of U.S. veterans, and they're reading it, or there are some people who are elected or selected to read the poems for the veterans if they choose not to or can't for whatever reason, and many other things there. I think art installations, and really fascinating ideas that can go as far as the creativity of the poet.
I think that's a perk in itself. But are there
are
there any perks to becoming the next one?
Oh yes, I think so. I think that if you're talking for the moment about the youth poet laureate, I think there's a major boon in that's something that you could put on and the poet laureate could do this too. You could put it on your resume, on your CV. I think that this would be something that would really help a youth poet laureate who's looking to get into college, into graduate school. And I think that for the poet themselves, I think that it's great exposure, and if you are someone who is really looking to make inroads in poetry and have it as a big part of your life, it's a great way to make you and your poetry known to a broader audience.
That's good. That's great. I'm hoping that those that are listening are encouraged by all of that.
I hope so too.
So you did mention the term limit, or the term length, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's 2 years.
2 years for the poet laureate and a year for the youth poet laureate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Right.
As we are kind of getting close to the end of this episode, what are you looking forward to as a judge?
Oh, to be honest, I am looking forward to, and this is going to sound strange, but I'm looking forward to a really tough decision to make. And that's with last year with the Youth Poet Laureate, we had a really hard decision who we were going to pick to be the Youth Poet Laureate, because we had some very good candidates, and we had two particular candidates who were excellent, and it was tough. Knowing that the choice we were going to make was going to be great for the city, but boy, to struggle with that level of talent is, that's a beautiful and painful pleasure. But it really, that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to hearing the poetry from these candidates, from hearing about their vision, reading about them, and their commitment to poetry, their commitment to Brockton. That's the stuff I really look forward to.
I look forward to that as well. This
Yeah.
will be my first time judging, so I'm excited for that. I know I didn't add this on the list, but now I am curious.
Yeah.
I did read the requirements that Philip sent us.
Yes.
So one is to write a poem about Brockton.
Right.
Now, what are the other pieces required?
So I think there are there is the original poem about Brockton, and this can be from their perspective, their experiences growing up in Brockton. You could talk about the history, talk about the culture of Brockton, and then there are two other original poems that what they feel are their best poems, and that can be on any subject matter. And then there's going to be a statement that is going to detail community service, as it relates to volunteerism, other community service that the candidate is engaged in. And then, if at all applicable, where some of their poetry has been published, have they won any awards? Just kind of tell us a little about yourself as a practicing poet,
Awesome.
Yeah.
This is exciting.
It is exciting.
When does the process begin for all of this? Just for those that are watching and they're like, I'm about to dust off my book.
Right.
I'm going to start reading. I'm going
Right.
to start going to these open mics that they've mentioned.
Absolutely.
What
Absolutely.
is the time frame for this?
So the time frame is, so for Youth Poet Laureate, the submissions are taking place, that's coming up, so March 1st to 31st, we're asking the Youth Poet Laureate to submit all their material. And then for the Poet Laureate, that's going to be the month of April 1st through the 30th. And then we're going to select, the pool of candidates to come in. There will be a public reading in a public forum, and so the candidates will read their poems, and we'll talk a little bit about their vision. And then we decide, and I believe that's going to happen, I think that's going to happen May or June for both. I think, Youth Poet Laureate first, then Poet Laureate, and they assume the duties in August.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is moving fast.
Yeah.
So this will be this year.
Right. And we're just about ready to really start getting the word out, and I know I'm really going to get the word out across Massasoit. We're right here in Brockton. So we want our students to be aware of this and put in to see what happens.
Awesome. Well, this was really great. I think we've covered a lot. Is there anything that I'm missing that we should share with the community in regards to the Poet Laureate and Youth Poet?
I think you nailed it. I think you've got all the main points down. The information will be available, straight across the city, in various different venues. I think on social media platforms, it'll all be getting out, and we'll be trying to spread the word ourselves. And I really just hope, and I'm looking forward to who applies, and just the level of talent and commitment. It's going to be great.
I agree with that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark Walsh. This is amazing. And like I said, I enjoy listening to your work as well. I've been to a few open mics at the library. So it's going to be a pleasure serving beside you as a judge.
Well, Courtney, I'm looking forward to it. And you're committed. You're committed to the city. And this is just going to be a pleasure.
Awesome.
Great.
All right. Well, until next time, see you.